Roland Crow didn't reach the top of the city's food chain by listening to words, he survived by reading the skin. While the rest of the world slept, his eyes were wide, dissecting every micro-expression and tremor that dared enter his penthouse. The clock struck 7 a.m. sharp in the oppressive, sterile silence of his dining room. Elara Vance, his new maid, moved with a calculated grace that was slightly off-tempo today. As she reached forward to pour his tea, the hem of her sleeve snagged, hiking up just high enough to betray a secret. Against her pale skin, the fingerprint-shaped bruises bloomed like dark, rotting violets. Elara gasped, her face draining of color as she frantically yanked the fabric down, but it was too late. Roland's silver fork clicked against the porcelain, a sound like a hammer cocking. The air in the room curdled with sudden, predatory heat. Elara trembled, not because she had spilled the tea, but because she realized the monster who owned the city was now looking at the damage done by a monster of a different kind. Roland didn't move, his gaze locked on her shaking wrist, silently promising that whoever had dared to touch what belonged under his roof was already a dead man walking. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning light in Oakhaven did not arrive with warmth, it filtered through the smog and the towering glass monoliths of the financial district like a bruised confession. In the penthouse of the Crow Tower, the light was further filtered by tinted, bulletproof panes that rendered the world in shades of cold charcoal and muted silver. Roland Crow sat at the head of his obsidian-veined marble table, a man who occupied space with the heavy, undeniable presence of a tombstone. To the citizens below, he was a myth, a shadow that moved the gears of the city's black markets. To those within his inner circle, he was an absolute, the final word in a world of shifting loyalties. The room was a testament to a specific kind of lonely power. The walls were lined with sound-dampening panels of dark velvet and rare wood, ensuring that the only sounds that existed were the ones Roland permitted. The air was climate-controlled to a precise 68 degrees, smelling faintly of expensive leather, ozone, and the bitter, dark roast of coffee that cost more per pound than the average worker made in a week. This was his fortress, a sterile laboratory where he dissected the day's business before the rest of the world had even hit their alarm clocks. Roland was a creature of meticulous, almost pathological, observation. He did not merely look, he scanned. His mind was a high-speed processor that cataloged the world in data points. He noted the 3mm deviance in the way his morning newspaper was folded. He noted the slight hum of the refrigerator in the far kitchen, a sound that indicated a failing compressor he would have replaced by noon. He was a man who survived by noticing the things others were too lazy or too comfortable to see. Across the vast expanse of the dining room, Elara Vance moved with a desperate, quiet grace. She had been in his employ for exactly 22 days. Roland had chosen her himself from a pool of candidates because she possessed a quality he found useful, invisibility. She was the kind of woman people looked past, mouseish, quiet, with eyes that stayed perpetually fixed on the floorboards. She was a ghost in a house of shadows. But today, the ghost was malfunctioning. Roland didn't look up from his plate, but he felt the change in the room's frequency. He heard the way her rubber-soled shoes dragged slightly on the polished floor, a millisecond of friction that shouldn't have been there. He heard the jagged, uneven rhythm of her breath, a sharp contrast to the slow, steady pulse of a person at peace. She was terrified. That wasn't unusual, most people were terrified in his presence. But this was a different flavor of fear. This was the fear of a rabbit that had already felt the teeth of the hound. He watched her through the reflection in his polished silver spoon. She reached for the heavy crystal carafe of water, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. As she leaned forward, her frame seemed to fold in on itself, as if she were trying to occupy as little physical space as possible. It was a defensive posture, one he had seen in men who were about to be interrogated. Then, it happened. The slip. As she stretched her arm across the table to refill his glass, the starched white cuff of her uniform caught on the edge of a heavy silver candelabra. The fabric didn't just snag, it hitched upward, riding halfway up her forearm. In the harsh, unforgiving light of the penthouse, the truth was revealed in technicolor. Roland's fork stopped midair. Beneath the pristine silk of her sleeve, Illyra's skin was a map of violence. The marks were fresh, a deep, angry purple that faded into a sickly, mottled yellow at the edges. They were fingerprint-shaped, 5 distinct points of pressure where a hand had clamped down with enough force to burst the capillaries beneath the surface. Above those were older, thin welts, the kind left by a cord or a thin belt, wrapping around the delicate bone of her wrist like a macabre bracelet. Illyra let out a sound, a tiny, broken sob that she tried to swallow back into her throat. She yanked her arm back so violently that the water carafe tipped, sending a deluge of ice-cold water cascading across the marble table, soaking the morning reports Roland had been reading. Oh God, I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice a frantic, high-pitched vibration. She began to scrub at the table with her apron, her movements manic, her head bowed so low her hair shielded her face. I'll clean it, Mr. Crow. I'm so sorry. I'm just so clumsy lately. I tripped. I fell into the doorframe at home. It's my fault. I'm so sorry. Roland didn't move. He didn't even flinch as the cold water seeped toward the sleeve of his bespoke suit. He laid his fork down with a deliberate, hauntingly quiet clink. The sound was small, but in the pressurized silence of the room, it carried the weight of a death sentence. Stop, Roland said. The word was a low-frequency rumble, a command that bypassed the ears and settled directly in the marrow of the bone. Illyra froze. She remained hunched over the table, her hand clutching a sodden napkin, her shoulders shaking with the force of suppressed weeping. Look at me, Illyra, he commanded. She didn't move. She couldn't. In this house, Roland began, his voice devoid of heat, which made it infinitely more terrifying, silence is a currency. I pay for it. I value it. But there is a difference between the silence of peace and the silence of a secret. Secrets are a liability. And I do not tolerate liabilities under my roof. He stood up. He was a tall man, and when he rose, the shadows seemed to stretch with him. He walked around the long table, his footsteps silent on the marble. He stopped inches from her. He could smell the cheap detergent on her uniform, the salt of her tears, and the metallic tang of old blood. He reached out. Illyra flinched, a full-body convulsion that spoke of 1,000 previous blows. She braced for the impact, her eyes squeezed shut. But the strike never came. Instead, she felt the cool, dry touch of Roland's fingers as he gently, almost clinically, took hold of her wrist. He didn't squeeze. His grip was a paradox, unyielding yet strangely light. With his other hand, he reached for her sleeve. He didn't ask. He simply pushed the fabric up, inch by inch, until her entire arm was exposed to the light. The damage was worse than it had appeared in the reflection. There was a circular burn near the crook of her elbow, the perfect diameter of a cigar. The bruising on her bicep was layered. Someone had grabbed her, released her, and then grabbed her again in the exact same spot, deepening the trauma. You told me you fell, Roland said, his eyes scanning the injuries with the cold precision of a forensic pathologist. Tell me, Illyra, what kind of doorframe has fingers? What kind of staircase smokes cigars? Please, she choked out, her eyes flying open, brimming with a terror that made her pupils dilate until her eyes were nothing but black voids. Please, Mr. Crow. Don't make me say it. If he finds out I told, he'll kill me. He said he has people everywhere. He said even you wouldn't touch him. Roland's jaw tightened, a small muscle jumping in his cheek. It was the only sign of the tectonic rage shifting beneath the surface. He wasn't a man given to outbursts. His anger was a cold, liquid thing, like liquid nitrogen. It didn't burn, it shattered. The man who did this, Roland said, his voice dropping an octave, thinks he is a god. He thinks he can mark what belongs in my sphere of influence and walk away without a scratch. He is mistaken. In this city, I am the only god that matters. He released her arm and turned his back to her, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window. He looked out at the city of Oakhaven. It was a beautiful, rotting thing. From this height, you couldn't see the trash in the gutters or the desperation in the eyes of the people. You only saw the light. And there, in the distance, was the courthouse, a neoclassical temple of white stone that housed the city's legal elite. I know who he is, Elara, Roland said softly. I've seen the way you look at the news when his face appears. I've seen the way you tremble when the morning paper has his name on the front page. Elara collapsed into the chair, her strength finally failing her. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs finally breaking through the surface. He's Julian Thorne, she sobbed. The district attorney. He came into the diner where I used to work. He acted so kind at first. But then he started following me. He told me he could protect me. Then he told me he owned me. He said if I ever left, he'd use the police to plant drugs on me. He said he'd put me in a cell and make sure the guards forgot to lock the door. Roland closed his eyes for a brief moment. Julian Thorne. The Golden Boy. The man currently running a platform of total transparency and the war on crime. Thorne had been a thorn in Roland's side for months, grandstanding for the cameras about dismantling the Crow Syndicate. It was the ultimate hypocrisy. The man who wore the white hat was a monster in the dark, while the man who wore the black hat was the one standing in a penthouse, feeling a strange, ancient sense of protectiveness for a woman who was technically nothing more than a line item in his budget. Thorne is a public figure, Roland said, turning back to face her. He is protected by the very system he is rotting from within. A bullet would be easy. A hit would be simple. But a hit on a district attorney brings the federal government. It brings the light. And the light is bad for business. He walked back to her, leaning down so his face was level with hers. But Thorne has made a tactical error. He assumed that because I am a criminal, I have no code. He assumed that because you are a maid, you have no value. He is wrong on both counts. Roland reached for the intercom on the marble table. He pressed a button that bypassed the house staff and went directly to his security detail. Silas, Roland said. Yes, boss, came the gravelly response. The penthouse is now on a code red. No one enters or leaves without my thumbprint. Elara Vance is to be moved to the guest suite in the East Wing immediately. I want 2 men on her door at all times. If she sneezes, I want a report on the velocity. Understood. Anything else? Call the technicians, Roland added, his eyes never leaving Elara's. I want every bit of digital surveillance we have focused on Julian Thorne. I want his offshore accounts, his private emails, his browser history, and his laundry list. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what he whispers to himself when he's alone in the dark. We aren't going to kill him, Silas. We're going to erase him. He ended the call and looked at Elara. She was staring at him, her chest heaving, a look of profound disbelief on her face. Why, she whispered. Why would you do this for me? I'm nobody. Roland reached out and, for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a smile of kindness, it was the smile of a shark that had just caught the scent of blood in the water. Because, Elara, he said, I have spent my life building an empire of shadows. And I find it personally offensive when someone tries to out-monster me. You are no longer his victim. You are my weapon. And by the time I am finished, Julian Thorne will wish he had never learned your name. He stood up, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward his office. The war had begun, not with a roar of gunfire, but with the quiet closing of a door. Roland didn't let go of her wrist immediately. He held it with the clinical detachment of a jeweler examining a flawed diamond, his thumb tracing the perimeter of the largest bruise without pressing into the ache. He wanted her to feel the weight of his attention. He wanted her to understand that the world had shifted on its axis. Tell me about the first time, Roland said. His voice was lower now, a sandpaper rasp that seemed to pull the oxygen out of the room. Not the first time he hit you. The first time you realized that Julian Thorne, the city's savior, was a predator. Elara's breath hitched. She looked at the obsidian tabletop, seeing her own distorted reflection. It was 6 months ago, she began, her voice barely a thread of sound. I was working late shifts at a diner near the courthouse. He came in for coffee. Every night, same time. He was charming. He talked about his daughter, about his wife who died of cancer, about how hard it was to keep this city clean. He made me feel seen. I was just a waitress, and he was the district attorney, but he sat at my counter and listened. She closed her eyes, and a fresh tear escaped, tracing the edge of the faint swelling on her cheek. Then he offered me a job. Administrative assistant, he called it. Better pay, health insurance. I thought it was a miracle. But the first day in his private office, he locked the door. He didn't say a word. He just walked over and gripped my arm so hard I heard the tendon pop. He told me that he had looked into my past. He knew about my brother's record. He knew about the debt my mother left behind. He told me that if I ever made a sound, he'd make sure my brother died in a state cell before the week was out. Roland's eyes narrowed. This was the classic architecture of a sociopath. Thorne didn't just want physical dominance, he wanted the psychological annihilation of his victims. He used the law not as a shield, but as a scalpel to find the softest parts of a person's soul. And the marks on your arm? Roland prompted. That isn't administrative work. He gets frustrated, Elara whispered, her voice trembling with the memory. When a case goes wrong, or when the press asks too many questions, he comes to find me. He says it's my job to help him decompress. He likes the way I bruise. He told me it reminds him that he has the power to change things. That he can leave a mark on the world and no one can arrest him for it. Roland felt a cold, crystalline fury settle into his chest. He had killed men for less. He had ordered executions for slights far smaller than this. But Thorne was a different kind of prey. Thorne was a man of the institution. To kill him now would be to validate his crusade against the Crow Syndicate. It would turn a monster into a martyr, and Roland was not in the business of creating saints. He told me, Elara continued, her voice gaining a desperate edge, that even you were afraid of him. He said that Roland Crow was a relic of the past, a dinosaur waiting for the Ice Age. He said he was the new king of Oakhaven, and that the law was a much better weapon than a gun. A ghost of a smile touched Roland's lips, the kind of smile that preceded a massacre. Is that what he thinks? That the law is his weapon? Roland stood up and began to pace the length of the dining room. Each step was heavy, deliberate. Thorne believes the law is a solid wall. He thinks he's standing on top of it, looking down at the rest of us. What he doesn't realize is that a wall is just a collection of stones. And if you remove the right ones, the whole structure collapses, crushing the man standing on top. He stopped at a side table and picked up a heavy gold lighter, flipping the lid with a sharp clack. He didn't light a cigarette, he just watched the flame dance. You've been carrying his secrets like a lead weight, Elara. But secrets are only heavy when you're the only one holding them. When you give them to me, they become ammunition. He turned to look at her, his silhouette framed by the gray morning sky. I want you to think very carefully. Has he ever mentioned names? Men he meets in private? Men who don't show up in his campaign finance reports. A man like Thorne doesn't just abuse women, he abuses systems. He's greedy. And greed always leaves a paper trail. Elara looked up, her brow furrowing as she tried to reach through the fog of her trauma. There was a man. A few weeks ago. He didn't come through the front door. He used the service elevator. Thorne called him the architect. They talked about the docks. About a shipment that the police were supposed to miss during the midnight sweep. Roland's thumb stopped on the lighter. The docks. His territory. Thorne wasn't just a sadistic bully, he was a traitor to his own office. He was playing both sides of the fence, taking a cut of the very crime he claimed to be fighting. The architect, Roland repeated, the name sounding like a death knell. I know that name. He's a middleman for the human trafficking rings out of the East Coast. If Thorne is in bed with him, then he isn't just a corrupt politician. He's a parasite feeding on the very people he swore to protect. Roland walked back to Alara. This time, he didn't touch her. He stood over her, his presence a dark, protective canopy. You've given me more than enough, Alara. You've given me the thread. Now, I'm going to pull it until his entire life unspools. He looked toward the door as it opened. Silas entered, followed by two men in dark suits, their faces as expressionless as the stone walls of the penthouse. The East Wing is ready, boss, Silas said. The tech team is already tapping into the DA's private server. We've got a hit on a secondary encrypted cloud account. It's going to take time to crack, but we're in. Good, Roland said. He looked at Alara. Go with them. They will take you to a room where the doors lock from the inside. There is a medical kit there, and a woman, a doctor I trust, will be coming to look at your arm. You will not be touched. You will not be threatened. In this house, you are the most precious thing I own, because you are the key to Julian Thorne's ending. As the guards stepped forward to escort her, Alara paused. She looked at Roland, her eyes searching his cold, gray gaze. Why? She asked again. You're a man who kills for money. Why go to all this trouble for a maid? Roland watched her leave, his expression returning to that of a marble statue. He waited until the doors clicked shut before he spoke to the empty room. Because, he whispered, I can't stand a man who thinks he's better than the devil. The door clicked shut with a sound of finality that echoed through the cavernous dining hall, leaving Roland Crow alone with the cooling tea and the ghosts of his own ambition. He stood motionless for a long minute, his hands resting on the back of the obsidian chair Alara had just vacated. The warmth of her body still lingered on the leather, a ghost of a presence that felt jarringly human in a room designed for intimidation. He looked down at the table. The water she had spilled was still there, a shimmering pool reflecting the cold Oakhaven sky. He didn't call for a servant to clean it. Instead, he watched a single drop slide toward the edge, hanging for a second before falling into the darkness of the carpet. That was Julian Thorne, a man clinging to the edge of a precipice, unaware that the gravity of his own sins was about to take hold. Roland turned and strode toward his private study. This was the nerve center of the syndicate, a room lined with leather-bound books that hid sophisticated servers and encrypted communication lines. As he entered, the lights hummed to life, triggered by his biometric signature. Silas, Roland said, not raising his voice. He knew the man was already behind him. Boss, Silas replied, leaning against the doorframe. The girl is settled. She's terrified, but she's smart. She's already asking if she can help with the filing. I think she needs to feel useful to keep the panic at bay. Let her, Roland said, sitting behind a desk carved from ancient bog oak. Give her whatever menial tasks keep her mind off the bruises. But I want her guarded by the inner circle. No one outside of this floor knows she's here. If Thorne suspects I have her, he won't wait for a legal move. He'll burn the city down to hide his tracks. Silas nodded, his face grim. We've got a problem, though. My contact at the precinct says Thorne just called an emergency press conference for 10 o'clock tonight. He's going to announce a new, clean sweep initiative. He's framing it as a direct assault on our distribution hubs at the docks. Roland leaned back, steepled his fingers, and let out a soft, mirthless chuckle. Of course he is. It's the classic play. He's feeling the heat from his own corruption, so he creates a bonfire somewhere else to distract the public. He wants to look like a hero so that when the rumors about his private life start to leak, people will dismiss them as a Mafia smear campaign. Are we going to let him? Silas asked. No, Roland said, his eyes flashing like flint. We're going to give him exactly what he wants. He wants a war. We'll give him one. But we aren't going to fight him with guns, Silas. We're going to fight him with the truth, and in a city as corrupt as Oakhaven, the truth is the only thing more dangerous than a hollow-point bullet. He turned his monitor toward Silas. On the screen, a series of encrypted files were already beginning to populate. Look at this. Thorne's private server isn't just full of legal documents. It's a trophy room. He has photos, recordings, and logs of every woman he's broken. He's so arrogant that he thinks he's the only one who can navigate the encryption. He's kept a digital ledger of his own depravity. Roland's finger hovered over a file labeled Project Architect. He's not just working with the human traffickers, Silas. He's the one providing the legal cover for the shipments to move through the federal checkpoints. He's using the district attorney's office to bypass the Coast Guard. He's the monster he's pretending to hunt. The silence in the study grew heavy. Even Silas, a man who had seen the worst the world had to offer, looked sickened. What's the move, boss? If we leak this now, he'll have his friends in the media bury it. We don't leak it to the media yet, Roland said, his voice dropping to a whisper. We leak it to the one person Thorne fears more than me. We leak it to the FBI's Internal Affairs Division, specifically to Agent Miller. He's the only one in that building who hasn't taken a check from us or from Thorne. He's an idealist. And an idealist with a smoking gun is a force of nature. Roland stood up and walked to a small safe set into the wall. He dialed the combination and pulled out a burner phone. He stared at it for a moment, the weight of the decision resting on his shoulders. By involving the feds, he was inviting the light into his own house. He was risking the syndicate for the sake of a maid with fingerprint-shaped bruises. Most men in his position would call it a bad investment. They would say that Alara Vance was replaceable, but the Empire was not. But Roland Crow didn't see it that way. To him, the Empire was only as strong as the code it was built on. And his code was simple: you do not touch what is mine. He activated the phone and began typing a message that would change the history of Oakhaven. The city is going to wake up tomorrow to a very different world, Silas, Roland said, his gaze fixed on the digital screen. Thorne thinks he's the king of the light. He thinks he can hide his darkness behind a silver tongue and a tailored suit. But he forgot one thing. What's that? Silas asked. Roland looked up, and for the first time, his face was completely devoid of mercy. The light only works if you have a place to hide. And I'm about to take away every shadow he has left. He hit send. The message hissed into the ether, a digital ghost carrying the weight of 1,000 sins. Roland Crow walked back to the window, looking out over the city he had ruled from the darkness. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond profit. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was the architect of a reckoning. Below him, the city continued to pulse, unaware that the foundations were already beginning to crumble. The Maid was safe in the East Wing, the DA was preparing his lies for the cameras, and the Mafia boss was standing in the center of the storm, waiting for the first crack of thunder. The air in Roland's private war room was thick with the scent of ozone and cold calculation. While the rest of the penthouse was a masterpiece of aesthetic luxury, this room was a skeletal cage of monitors, cooling fans, and high-frequency encryption hubs. It was here that the Crow Syndicate's true power resided, not in the barrels of guns, but in the fiber-optic cables that threaded through the city like a nervous system. Roland stood at the center of the room, his jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with the tension of a man holding back a landslide. Silas entered, the heavy steel door thudding shut behind him with a vacuum seal. He dropped a thick, manila folder onto the central glass table. The physical weight of the paper seemed to vibrate against the digital screen surrounding them. Silas looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from staring into the sun for too long. "It's worse than we thought, Roland," Silas said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "My source in the Justice Department didn't just give me a tip. He gave me a look at the whiteboard in Thorne's inner sanctum. This isn't just a local harassment campaign anymore. Thorne has been building a ghost file for 3 years. He's calling it Operation Carrion. He's not looking for street-level busts. He's building a federal RICO case that links every shell company, every dockside union, and every offshore account we've touched since the turn of the decade." Roland didn't move. He stared at the folder, his eyes tracking the red stamp on the corner. "Top secret, eyes only." "RICO," Roland whispered. The word carried the weight of a life sentence. Racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. It was the law designed to be a vacuum, sucking up everyone from the boss down to the man who drove the getaway car. He's trying to decapitate the entire organization in one sweep. He's got names, dates, and wiretap logs we didn't even know existed, Silas continued, pacing the small perimeter of the room. If he presents this to a grand jury, the FBI won't just come for you. They'll bring the HRT teams. They'll seize the tower. They'll freeze every asset before we can even hire a lawyer. Thorne isn't just trying to put you in a cell, he's trying to erase the Crow name from the history of this city. Roland finally reached out, flipping open the folder. He saw photographs, grainy, long-lens shots of himself meeting with union leaders, surveillance of the docks at 3 a.m., and, most damningly, a flow chart that mapped the syndicate's financial heart with terrifying accuracy. He's good, Roland admitted, his voice devoid of emotion. I've underestimated his ambition. I thought he was just a sadist playing at being a politician. I didn't realize he was a visionary playing at being a predator. We have to take him out, Silas said, his hand instinctively drifting toward the holster at his small of the back. Tonight. Before he can hand this over to the feds. I have a team on standby. We can make it look like a carjacking gone wrong in the Heights. A few stray bullets, a stolen watch, and the RICO case dies with the man who wrote it. Roland looked up, his gray eyes turning to ice. No. Use your head, Silas. Look at the timing. Thorne is the city's golden boy. He's been on every news cycle for a month talking about how he's getting close to the heart of the Oakhaven underworld. If he ends up face down in the gutter tonight, the federal government won't see a carjacking. They'll see a martyr. They'll see a direct hit on a public servant who was too close to the truth. It would be an act of war against the United States government. So we just sit here and wait for the handcuffs? Silas growled. We do the opposite, Roland said, his mind beginning to whir with the precision of a master clockmaker. We can't kill him because a dead Thorne is a hero. But a shamed Thorne? A Thorne who is revealed to be the very monster he's prosecuting. That Thorne is a liability the feds will drop like a hot coal. If we kill him, the RICO case stays alive, fueled by the blood of a dead DA. But if we destroy his character, the RICO case becomes fruit of a poisonous tree. Every piece of evidence he's gathered will be viewed through the lens of his own corruption. The case will collapse because the man who built it is a lie. Roland turned to the monitors, his fingers dancing across a keyboard. Data began to stream past, bank records, encrypted emails, and the digital ghost of Julian Thorne's secret life. Thorne thinks he's untouchable because he holds the shield of the law, Roland said, his reflection ghosting over the scrolling text. But a shield only protects you from what's in front of you. He doesn't realize that the woman he's been breaking in the dark is the one who just handed me the key to his fortress. He thinks he's preparing a case against me. He has no idea that I am currently preparing the execution of his soul. Silas stopped pacing, watching the screens. You're talking about a systematic dismantling. That takes time, Roland. We might not have days. We might have hours. Then we make every second count, Roland replied. I want you to call our contact in the digital forensics wing. I want them to look into the project architect files Alara mentioned. If Thorne is moving people through the docks, he's not doing it for free. Follow the money, Silas. Find the bridge between the district attorney's office and the trafficking rings. Once we find that bridge, we don't blow it up. We wait for him to walk across it, and then we let the whole world watch him fall. Roland stood tall, his shadow stretching across the war room. The untouchable Julian Thorne had just made the one mistake a predator can never afford. He had left a survivor. And that survivor was now the cornerstone of Roland Crow's counterstrike. Silas leaned over the glass table, his knuckles white against the surface. The blue light from the monitors caught the scars on his face, making them look like deep trenches in a war-torn landscape. He was a man of action, a man who understood the finality of a lead slug, and the abstract nature of Roland's plan was clearly chafing against his instincts. Boss, I hear you, Silas muttered, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial rasp. Character assassination is clean. It's elegant. But the feds aren't elegant. If Thorne has even 10% of this RICO file backed up on a DOJ server, it doesn't matter if he's caught in bed with a dozen corpses. The paper trail is already blazed. The moment he hits that podium tonight, the wheels start turning. Once a federal investigation hits a certain velocity, you can't stop it by just discrediting the guy who started it. Roland didn't look away from the scrolling data. You're thinking like a soldier, Silas. You're worried about the bullet already in the air. I'm thinking like an architect. I'm worried about the ground the shooter is standing on. He tapped a key, freezing a specific image on the main screen. It was a digital scan of a wire transfer. $250,000 moved through a shell company in the Cayman Islands, ending up in a blind trust labeled JT Legacy. Look at the date, Roland commanded. Silas squinted. 3 days ago. So? 3 days ago, Thorne authorized a random inspection of Pier 14, Roland explained, his voice gaining a predatory edge. Our pier. He made sure the news crews were there to film the empty crates, making us look like we were scrambling to hide our tracks. But look at the manifest for the ship docked at Pier 12, the one he didn't inspect. It belongs to a Panamanian logistics firm. The architect's firm. That $250,000 wasn't a bribe to stop a prosecution. It was a toll. Thorne is the one who opened the gate. Roland stood up and began to pace the narrow confines of the room, his mind working through the variables with the speed of a high-frequency trading algorithm. The RICO case isn't just a weapon to use against us, Silas. It's his insurance policy. If he destroys me, he becomes the hero of Oakhaven. No one will look at his bank accounts. No one will ask why shipments of textiles are moving through Pier 12 at midnight without a customs stamp. He's clearing the competition so he can have a monopoly on the city's sin. The weight of the realization seemed to settle on Silas. He looked back at the manila folder, no longer seeing a threat to their freedom, but a blueprint of Thorne's own greed. He's using the Justice Department as his own private hit squad. Exactly, Roland said. And that is his Achilles heel. The DOJ hates being used. If we can prove that the RICO case was manufactured to protect his own trafficking interests, the feds won't just drop the case. They'll tear him apart to save their own reputation. They'll want to prove they weren't his puppets. Roland stopped in front of a wall-mounted map of the city. He placed his finger on the glittering dot that represented the mayor's charity gala, scheduled for the following week. He thinks he's untouchable because he's the one holding the leash, Roland whispered. But a leash is just a rope. And a rope can be used to pull, or it can be used to hang. He turned back to Silas, his expression more intense than it had been all morning. I want you to pull every man we have off the street. No more collections. No more persuasion. We go completely dark. If a Crow soldier so much as spits on the sidewalk, I want them dealt with. We need to look like ghosts. While Thorne is shouting into the microphones about the Mafia menace, I want the city to feel an eerie, total silence from our side. And the girl? Silas asked. Ilera. She's the only one who can put a face to the monster. Thorne's going to notice she's missing soon. Her shift started an hour ago. He probably has a tracker on her phone, or a tail. I've already had the tech team spoof her phone's GPS, Roland said. Right now, according to the cell towers, Ilera Vance is currently sitting in a library 3 towns over. By the time Thorne realizes she's gone, she'll be a ghost in my machine. But you're right, she is the key. She isn't just a witness to his violence, she's the one who saw the architect in his office. She's the one who can link the bruises on her arm to the blood on his hands. Roland's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he read the encrypted text. It's starting, Roland said. Thorne just moved up the press conference. He's going live in 30 minutes from the courthouse steps. He's going to name names, Silas. He's going to name my name. What do we do? Roland reached for his jacket, sliding it on and adjusting the silk lapels with a terrifying calmness. We watch. We listen. And we let him climb as high as he wants. Because the higher he gets, the less air there is to breathe when I finally cut the cord. He walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. Go to the East Wing. Check on Alara. Tell her the man who hurt her is about to become the most famous man in Oakhaven for all the wrong reasons. I want her to see his face on the screen. I want her to see that he can't hurt her anymore. As Roland stepped out of the war room, the heavy steel door hissed shut, leaving the blue light of the monitors to flicker against the empty obsidian table. The hunt for the untouchable had officially moved from the shadows into the blinding light of the public eye. The silence of the penthouse was now punctuated by the low, digital hum of a dozen news feeds. Roland stood in the center of his living room, a space that usually felt like a cathedral of glass and steel, but now felt more like a sniper's nest. On the massive primary screen, the courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters, their breath visible in the chilly Oakhaven air. Microphones were bunched together like a bouquet of black plastic, all waiting for one man. Julian Thorne stepped into the frame. He was a master of optics. He wore a charcoal suit that managed to look both expensive and relatable, and he walked with a slight, practiced humble slouch that screamed, man of the people. He looked into the cameras with an expression of weary determination, the face of a crusader who had sacrificed sleep for justice. My fellow citizens, Thorne began, his voice projected with a rich, sonorous authority. For too long, this city has been held hostage by a shadow. We have lived in the grip of a syndicate that believes it is above the law. Today, I am here to tell you that the shadows are receding. In the guest wing, Alara sat on the edge of a plush velvet sofa, her eyes glued to a smaller monitor. Her hands were clamped together so tightly her knuckles were white. Seeing Thorne's face, the face that had hovered inches from hers while he whispered threats, made her stomach coil with a cold, visceral nausea. He's lying, she whispered to the empty room. He's making them love him so they won't believe me. Back in the main room, Roland watched with a surgical focus. He didn't see a hero, he saw a man overplaying his hand. Thorne reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding it up like a holy relic. I have officially filed the preliminary paperwork for a racketeering case that will dismantle the Crow organization from its roots to its canopy, Thorne declared. The flashbulbs erupted in a blinding frenzy. Roland Crow is not a businessman. He is a parasite. And I will not rest until his tower is empty and he is behind the bars he so richly deserves. Silas walked into the room, his eyes moving from the screen to Roland. He just put a target on your back, boss. Every ambitious cop in the state is going to be looking for a reason to kick in our doors tonight. Let them look, Roland said, his voice a cool contrast to the heat on the screen. Thorne just gave me exactly what I needed. By naming me specifically, he's tied his entire political career to this one case. He's bet the house on his ability to take me down. If the case fails, he doesn't just lose a prosecution, he loses his viability. He becomes the man who cried wolf. Roland turned away from the screen, walking toward a hidden console in the wall. He tapped a code, and a secondary screen flickered to life, showing a live data stream of Thorne's encrypted cloud account. The Untouchable had a hidden file folder titled Collateral. Look at this, Silas, Roland beckoned. While he's on those steps talking about cleaning up the streets, his automated system just received a confirmation for a shipping container transfer. Pier 12. Midnight tonight. The Panamanian firm again. He's moving a shipment tonight? Silas asked, incredulous. Right after that speech. He's either insane or he thinks he's literally God. It's the best time to do it, Roland explained. He's just told the world he's focused on us. Every law enforcement resource in the city is currently being diverted to watch our warehouses and our clubs. He's created a massive blind spot for himself. He's using his own press conference as a smoke screen for a trafficking run. Roland's eyes darkened, the gray turning to the color of a stormy sea. He thinks I'm a dinosaur. He thinks I'm going to respond to this by sending a hitman to the courthouse. He's prepared for that. He has a dozen federal marshals around him. He's expecting the Mafia response. But you're not going to give him one, Silas said, finally catching the rhythm of the game. No, Roland said, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. I'm going to give him a ghost. I want our best surveillance team at Pier 12. I want high-definition, thermal imaging footage of that container being opened. I want Thorne's signature on the digital manifest. And most importantly, Roland paused, his voice dropping to a whisper, I want Alara to see it. I want her to see the moment his mask begins to crack. Roland walked over to a small cabinet and poured 2 fingers of amber scotch. He didn't drink it. He held it up to the light of the screen where Thorne was still shaking hands with reporters. To the untouchable, Roland toasted quietly. May your fall be as public as your rise. The second chapter ended not with the sound of a gun, but with the quiet, rhythmic tapping of a keyboard. The Rico case was a wall, but Roland Crowe had just found the loose stone. Julian Thorne had declared war on a man who didn't fight for territory, he fought for the soul of the city. And for the first time in Oakhaven's history, the devil was the one fighting for the truth. The midnight air at the Oakhaven docks didn't just carry the scent of salt and rotting timber, it carried the stench of a dying city's secrets. While Roland Crowe's penthouse was a sanctuary of filtered air and silent marble, the waterfront was a visceral, grinding machine of industry and illicit shadows. This was the dig, the process of unearthing the filth that Julian Thorne buried beneath his tailored suits and lofty rhetoric. Roland sat in the back of a nondescript black van parked 300 yards from Pier 12. The interior of the vehicle was cramped, lit only by the ghostly blue glow of 4 high-definition monitors and the blinking LEDs of a signal scrambling array. Beside him sat a young woman named Kale, a digital phantom who had been on the syndicate's payroll since she was 18. Her fingers moved across her keyboard with the speed of a concert pianist, weaving through the city's Port Authority firewalls. Thermal is live, Kale whispered, her eyes reflecting the data streams. I've bypassed the port's local loop. We're piggybacking on the Coast Guard's own feed. If they look at the logs, it'll look like their own system was just doing a routine diagnostic. On the main screen, the world turned into a landscape of oranges, yellows, and deep, necrotic purples. The massive shipping container on Pier 12 glowed with a faint heat signature. It had arrived on a Panamanian freighter 2 hours ago, bypassed by the random inspections Thorne had steered toward Roland's properties. There, Roland said, pointing to a flickering heat bloom near the container's seal. A black sedan, identical to the ones used by the district attorney's security detail, pulled into the frame. 2 men stepped out. Even in the blurred thermal imagery, their movements were disciplined, professional. They didn't look like street thugs, they looked like men who held badges during the day. One of them held a tablet up to the container's electronic lock. He's using a master override code, Kale noted, her brow furrowing. That code is only issued to 3 people in the city, the port director, the mayor, and the district attorney. He's not even trying to hide it in the system. He thinks he's so far above suspicion that no one would ever audit the override logs. Arrogance is the father of all fatal mistakes, Roland murmured. He watched as the heavy steel doors of the container swung open. What the thermal cameras revealed wasn't crates of narcotics or illegal weapons. It was the heat signatures of people, 6, maybe 7 figures huddled at the back of the steel box, their body heat radiating in desperate, trembling pulses against the cold metal. This was the human trafficking ring Alara had overheard. This was the architect's cargo. Record everything, Roland commanded, his voice vibrating with a cold, predatory focus. I want the faces of the drivers, the serial number on that tablet, and the timestamp linked to the Port Authority's clock. This isn't just a scandal, Kale. This is a federal execution. While the surveillance team worked the docks, the second part of the dig was happening back at the penthouse. Silas had moved Alara into a small, secure office adjacent to the guest wing. He had given her a stack of photos, surveillance shots taken over the last 6 months of every person who had entered Thorne's private residence or his satellite office. I know it's hard, Alara, Silas said, his usual gruffness softened by a rare touch of empathy. But if we're going to bury him, we need the names. You told Roland about the architect. Is he in any of these? Ilara's hands shook as she flipped through the glossy prints. The trauma of the morning was still etched into her face, but there was a new light in her eyes, a flickering flame of defiance. She was no longer just a victim, she was the lead investigator in her own liberation. She stopped on a photo taken outside a high-end steakhouse 3 weeks prior. It showed Thorne shaking hands with a man in a beige trench coat, a nondescript, middle-aged man who looked like an insurance salesman. "That's him," Ilara whispered, her finger tapping the image. "That's the man who came to the office." Thorne called him Vance, but then corrected himself and called him the architect. They talked about shipments and clearance. Thorne told him that as long as the Crow Syndicate was the headline, the back door would stay open. Silas took the photo and scanned it into his handheld device. Within seconds, the Syndicate's facial recognition software returned a hit. Marcus Vance. Disbarred lawyer, former fixer for the Eastern European cartels. Reported dead in a boating accident 5 years ago. It seems Julian Thorne is a fan of resurrecting the dead when they're useful to him. Back in the van, Roland watched as the black sedan led a covered transport truck away from the pier. He didn't order his men to intercept. He didn't call the police. He simply watched the ghosts disappear into the Oakhaven night. "We have the footage," Kale said, leaning back and rubbing her eyes. "It's encrypted and backed up to 3 separate offshore servers. What's the next move, boss? We could send this to the evening news right now." "No," Roland said, standing up and straightening his coat. The blue light of the monitors made his eyes look like polished steel. "The news is a circus. I'm looking for a courtroom. If we give this to the press, Thorne's lawyers will tie it up in injunctions and claims of deepfake manipulation. We need someone who can act with the weight of the federal government behind them." He stepped out of the van into the biting cold of the docks. The crane lights swayed overhead, casting long, skeletal shadows across the concrete. Roland looked toward the city skyline, where the lights of the courthouse were still burning bright, a monument to the man who thought he was untouchable. "Kale, send the first packet," Roland ordered. "Not the human trafficking footage. Just the financial logs. Send them to Agent Miller at the FBI. Let him see the $250,000 transfer. Give him a taste of the rot. Let him start pulling the thread from the other end. By the time he gets to the docks, I want him hungry for a kill." Roland walked toward his waiting car, his mind already 3 steps ahead. The dig was nearly complete. He had the money, he had the witness, and now he had the crime. All that remained was the bait. He needed a way to draw Thorne out of his fortress and into a place where the light couldn't be turned off. "Silas," Roland said into his phone as the car pulled away from the waterfront. "Tell Ilara she's doing well. And tell her to start thinking about what she wants to wear to a gala. It's time we introduced the district attorney to the woman he thought he'd silenced forever." The 3rd chapter of Julian Thorne's life was closing, and the theme was inevitable. The truth doesn't stay buried, especially when Roland Crow is the one holding the shovel. The atmosphere in Oakhaven had shifted. It was a subtle, tectonic pressure, the kind that precedes a landslide. While Julian Thorne's face dominated every television screen and news app, heralding the imminent downfall of the Crow Syndicate, the actual streets had gone unnervingly quiet. Roland's soldiers had vanished from their usual corners. The high-stakes games in the backrooms of the Diamond Club had ceased. To the public, it looked like the Mafia was cowering. To Julian Thorne, it felt like a victory lap. But Thorne was a man haunted by a singular, nagging detail. Ilara Vance had vanished. Roland sat in his study, the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, watching a live feed of his own front gate. A sleek, silver government sedan pulled up to the security checkpoint. There was no siren, no flashing lights, just the quiet arrogance of a man who believed he held the master key to the city. "He's here," Silas said, stepping into the room. He checked the action on his sidearm, a habit born of decades in the trenches. "He's alone, mostly. 2 security details in the car, but he's coming up by himself. He's bold, Roland. I'll give him that." "It isn't boldness, Silas. It's desperation disguised as a power play," Roland replied, not moving from his desk. He's realized that his RICO case is a house of cards without the girl's testimony or her silence. He's here to see if I'm bluffing. Minutes later, the heavy oak doors to Roland's study swung open. Julian Thorne walked in as if he owned the air in the room. He didn't wait to be invited. He dropped into the leather armchair opposite Roland's desk and crossed his legs, a smug, practiced smile playing on his lips. Up close, away from the soft focus of the news cameras, the cracks in his golden boy persona were visible, the slight yellowing in the whites of his eyes, the twitch in his jaw that spoke of a man who fueled himself on spite and stimulants. You have a lovely fortress, Roland, Thorne said, his voice dripping with condescension. It's a shame the city is going to seize it and turn it into low-income housing by next summer. I hear the views from the state penitentiary are much more restrictive. Roland didn't blink. He picked up a crystal decanter and poured a single measure of water. You've made a lot of noise today, Julian. The press conference was a masterclass in fiction. But you didn't drive across town at 11 p.m. to discuss real estate. You're looking for something. Thorne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He leaned forward, the mask of the statesman slipping to reveal the predator beneath. I'm looking for a maid, Roland. A quiet, clumsy little thing named Alara. She seems to have forgotten to show up for her shift at my office, and my GPS tracker suggests she spent a significant amount of time near your tower before her phone miraculously died. I employ many people, Julian. I don't keep track of the domestic help, Roland said smoothly. Don't play with me, Thorne hissed, his hands slamming onto the desk. She's a thief. She took sensitive files from the district attorney's office. If you're harboring her, you're not just a racketeer, you're an accessory to a federal crime. I'll have a warrant for this entire building before sunrise. Roland leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Thorne's with a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy. Is that what she is? A thief? Or is she a witness? It's a very different set of paperwork, depending on which word you use. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Roland reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, high-resolution digital recorder. He set it on the desk between them. I know about Pier 12, Julian. I know about the architect. And I know about the Bruises, Roland said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. Thorne let out a sharp, jagged laugh, though it didn't reach his eyes. Bruises? In this city? Everyone has bruises, Roland. That's just the cost of doing business. And as for Pier 12, you're a criminal. Your word against mine is a joke. I am the law. I am the one who decides what is evidence and what is trash. That's the beauty of the digital age, Roland replied. The law isn't a person anymore. It's data. And data doesn't care about your campaign speeches. Thorne stood up, his face flushed a dark, angry red. He leaned over the desk, his voice a venomous whisper. Listen to me, you dinosaur. You think you're being a hero? You're a thug in a $5,000 suit. If you don't hand that girl over to me by tomorrow morning, I won't just prosecute you. I will burn you. I will find every person you've ever loved and I will put them in the ground. You have no idea what I'm capable of when the cameras are off. Roland sat back, his expression unchanged. He looked at the digital recorder. It was active. Thorne had just threatened a citizen and admitted to extrajudicial violence on a high-fidelity line. The warning has been delivered, Roland said quietly. Now, get out of my house. The next time we speak, it won't be in a room with a view. It will be in a room with a judge. Thorne straightened his tie, his hands trembling slightly with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. Enjoy the penthouse while you can, Roland. The clock is ticking. As Thorne stormed out, Silas stepped out from the shadows of the bookshelf. He was holding a tablet that showed the recording was already being uploaded to a secure, remote server. He's unraveling, Silas noted. He's coming apart at the seams. He didn't even check for bugs. He's arrogant, Roland said, watching the silver sedan peel away from the curb on the monitors. He thinks his badge is a suit of armor. He doesn't realize it's just a target. Roland looked at the recording. He didn't feel a sense of triumph, only a cold, grim satisfaction. The trap was set. Thorn had just confirmed his own malice on tape. Now, all that was left was to let the man's own momentum carry him over the cliff. "Call Kale," Roland ordered. "Tell her to prepare the first leak. We start with the offshore accounts. Let the public see the money before we show them the blood. People care about their taxes being stolen almost as much as they care about the truth." The warning had been issued, but it wasn't for Roland. It was the final tolling of the bell for Julian Thorn. The silver sedan's taillights vanished into the Oakhaven fog, but the stench of Julian Thorn's desperation lingered in the study like a sulphurous cloud. Roland remained seated, his hands folded over the bog oak desk. He didn't look like a man who had just been threatened with total annihilation. He looked like a man who had just finished watching the first act of a predictable play. "He's more than unraveling, Silas," Roland said, his voice cutting through the silence. "He's terrified. A man who truly holds the cards doesn't come to his enemy's house to scream about them. He simply plays them. Thorn came here because he has no testimony, no Alara, and no way to explain the $250,000 that just moved through his legacy trust." Silas moved to the window, watching the street below. "He's going to escalate. That warrant he threatened? He'll get it. He has enough judges on the payroll to sign off on a raid of the Vatican if he told them there were drugs in the communion wine. We can't keep Alara here much longer. This tower is a fortress, but it's also a cage if the feds surround it." "I'm ahead of him," Roland replied. He tapped a command on his desktop, and a floor plan of the city's underground transit tunnels appeared. "Thorn expects me to play defense. He expects me to hunker down and wait for the lawyers to save me. But that's not how you survive a predator. You don't build a wall, you move the target." Roland stood and walked over to the portrait of his father that hung on the far wall. With a slight pressure on the frame, the wall hissed open, revealing a hidden elevator, that escape hatch built during the height of the mob wars in the 80s. "Move Alara through the sub-level tunnels to the safe house in the heights. Not the one on the books. Use the florist's shop." "And Silas?" "Yeah. Make sure she has the dress. The one we ordered from the boutique in Paris. If she's going to be the face of his downfall, she needs to look like the queen she's about to become." Roland's phone chimed. It was an encrypted alert from Kale. "Miller is biting. He just requested the full audit trail for the JT Legacy Trust. He's bypassed Thorn's office and went straight to the bank's compliance officer." A cold, sharp spark of satisfaction flared in Roland's chest. The untouchable was about to feel the first chill of the winter. He wasn't just fighting the Mafia anymore, he was being hunted by the very system he had spent his life weaponizing. "The warning wasn't just words, Silas," Roland said, looking at the empty chair where Thorn had Saturday. "It was the sound of the trap snapping shut. He thinks he's the hunter, but he's already in the cage. He just hasn't noticed the bars yet." Roland turned off the monitors, plunging the study into darkness. The only light came from the city below, a city that was about to watch its golden boy burn. The shadows in the room seemed to lengthen as Roland stood by the hidden elevator, his silhouette a sharp, jagged edge against the dim amber glow. Silas remained by the window, his hands still resting near his holstered weapon. The tension between the two men wasn't born of fear, but of the shared understanding that the game had moved into its most dangerous phase. "You're making her a target, Roland," Silas said, his voice dropping into a low, somber register. "By putting her in that dress, by bringing her to the gala, you're not just using her as a witness. You're using her as bait. If Thorn snaps, he won't care about the cameras. He'll go for her throat." Roland turned slowly, his eyes reflecting the cold digital light of the remaining monitors. "She was already a target, Silas. The moment he laid a hand on her, her life was forfeit in his eyes. The only difference now is that she isn't alone in the dark. She has the entire city watching her." He walked back to the desk and picked up a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a necklace of teardrop diamonds, cold, brilliant, and sharp. Thorn's power comes from the fact that people are afraid to look at him directly. They see the district attorney, they see the law. But at that gala, when he looks at Alara, he won't see a maid. He'll see his own reflection. He'll see the one person who knows exactly what he is. Roland's phone buzzed again, a final confirmation from the sub-level security. Alara had been moved. The clumsy maid was gone, replaced by a ghost in the machine. He thinks he's coming for me tomorrow with a warrant, Roland continued, his voice barely a whisper. He thinks he's going to break down these doors and find his missing piece of evidence. Let him come. Let him find an empty penthouse. Let him feel the walls closing in while he stands in the middle of my living room. Roland looked out at the Oakhaven skyline. Somewhere out there, Julian Thorne was likely pouring himself a drink, trying to convince himself that he was still in control. He didn't know that the foundation of his world had already been liquidated. He didn't know that Agent Miller was currently reading the digital equivalent of his death warrant. The warning is over, Silas, Roland said, his jaw setting into a hard line. Tomorrow, the leaks begin. By the time the gala starts, Thorne won't be worried about a RICO case. He'll be worried about the sound of the handcuffs. He snapped the velvet box shut. The sound was as final as a gavel. The first act of the destruction of Julian Thorne was complete. The predator had been baited, the witness had been hidden, and the masterclass in systematic destruction was moving into its second, more public, stage. The digital world does not bleed, but it can scream. At 6 a.m., while the city of Oakhaven was pulling itself from sleep, the first domino was tipped. It didn't happen on the nightly news or in a sensationalist tabloid. It happened on the sterile, high-traffic servers of the Financial Chronicle and the internal bulletin boards of the Justice Department. Roland sat in the safe-house kitchen, a stark, clean space hidden behind the facade of a failing florist shop in the Heights. He watched a bank of 3 laptops. Beside him, Kale was a blur of motion, her headset glow-rimmed by the flickering data. Leak 1 is live, Kale whispered. We didn't dump the abuse files. We stayed surgical. I've released the audit trail for the JT Legacy Trust. Specifically, the link between the offshore Panamanian accounts and the down payment on Thorne's private vineyard in Napa. Roland watched the metrics. Within minutes, the story had been picked up by automated news bots. Within an hour, it was the top trending topic on social media. The golden boy of Oakhaven, the man who lived on a modest public servant salary, was suddenly revealed to be the owner of a multi-million-dollar estate funded by a shell company that specialized in logistics. The beauty of a financial leak, Roland remarked, his voice calm as he sipped a cup of tea, is that it requires no emotion to understand. You don't have to believe a victim. You only have to believe in math. And the math says Julian Thorne is a thief. In the back room of the safe house, Alara stood before a full-length mirror. The transition was jarring. The bruises on her arm were now being treated with professional-grade ointments, their angry purple fading to a dull, bruised yellow. She was no longer wearing the polyester uniform of a maid. She wore a silk robe, and on the bed behind her lay the gown Roland had promised, a masterpiece of midnight blue velvet that looked like the midnight sky. She looked at her reflection and didn't see the girl who had flinched at the sound of a closing door. She saw a woman who was becoming part of a legend. He's losing, isn't he? She asked as Silas walked into the room to check the perimeter. He's drowning, Silas replied, checking his watch. He spent the morning trying to get the stories retracted. He threatened to sue the Chronicle. But the FBI, Agent Miller, just issued a no comment to the press. In the world of federal investigations, a no comment is a death knell. It means they're already in the vault. Back at the courthouse, Julian Thorne was trapped in his office. Through the soundproof glass, he could see the swarm of reporters in the hallway. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. His political backers, the men who had shared expensive cigars with him just 48 hours ago, were suddenly unavailable for comment. He looked at his computer screen, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He knew where this was coming from. It wasn't a leak from his office. It was a surgical strike from the Crow Tower. You think you can play with my money, Roland? Thorne hissed to the empty room. He grabbed his desk phone and dialed a number he had sworn never to use during daylight hours. This is Thorne. The architect's shipment, the one at Pier 12. I want the cargo moved to the secondary location. And I want the Crow's maid found. I don't care how many bodies you have to drop. If she's alive by the time the gala starts, we're all going to the gallows. He slammed the phone down. He was no longer the district attorney, he was a cornered animal, and a cornered animal only knows one way to survive, by biting. Roland, watching the intercepted cellular traffic from the safe house, closed his laptop. He just called the architect, Roland told Silas. He's desperate. He's moving the victims. He's committing more crimes to cover the old ones. Should we stop the transport? Silas asked. No, Roland said, his eyes turning to Flint. Let him move them. Let him create a trail that even his friends in the precinct can't ignore. We have the money. We have the motive. Now, we're going to let him provide the final piece of the evidence, the intent. Roland walked to the window of the safe house, looking out at the city. The first leak had done its job. The pedestal was cracked. Now, it was time to let the golden boy realize that the higher he climbed, the harder the ground would be when he eventually hit it. The digital fire Roland had ignited began to consume Thorne's reputation with the speed of a data-driven forest fire. By noon, the legacy trust wasn't just a headline, it was a noose. In the safe house, the air was thick with the hum of cooling fans and the quiet, rhythmic clicking of Cale's keyboard. Roland stood behind her, watching as the public opinion metrics plummeted. The very people who had cheered Thorne's speech on the courthouse steps were now flooding the internet with demands for an audit. The betrayal of the public trust was a visceral thing, a wound that the city of Oakhaven didn't know how to heal. He's trying to counter-leak, Cale said, her eyes tracking a series of pings from a known pro-government blog. He's dropping internal memos from the DA's office that prove the financial records were fabricated by syndicate hackers. He's trying to make this a deep state conspiracy by the Mafia. Roland watched the counter-narrative attempt. It won't work. When you show a man a photo of his own house, he might believe it's a fake. When you show him the bank signature he used to buy it, he loses his faith in the lie. Thorne is fighting the math, and the math never loses. Roland's phone vibrated, a direct line that only one person possessed. He looked at the screen, Agent Miller. Roland stepped into the hallway, away from the digital noise. Agent Miller. I assume you've had a busy morning. You're playing a dangerous game, Crow. Miller's voice was a low, controlled growl. I don't like being used as a janitor for the syndicate's dirty laundry. If these files are fakes, I'll personally make sure you spend the rest of your life in a supermax. They aren't fakes, Miller, and you know it, Roland replied, his voice a calm anchor. The audit trail leads directly to the Panamanian logistics firm. You've been looking for the source of the trafficking at the docks for 2 years. I just handed you the man who holds the keys to the gate. The question is, are you going to arrest the man who gave you the truth, or the man who sold the city's children for a vineyard? There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Roland could hear the sound of Miller's office, the frantic shouting of agents, the ringing of phones. The FBI was in chaos. I need more than bank records for a human trafficking charge, Roland, Miller finally said. I need a witness. I need someone who has seen the cargo. You'll have your witness, Roland said, his eyes drifting to the door where Alara was waiting. But not on your terms. Thorne still has friends in the federal building. If I give her to you now, she'll be dead before the deposition is typed. You'll get your witness at the charity gala. In front of the cameras. In front of the mayor. Where no one can make her disappear. That's a circus, not a legal proceeding, Miller barked. In Oakhaven, Miller, the only way to get justice is to make sure the audience is too big for the judge to ignore. Watch the news at 8 p.m. I'm about to release the second leak. And this one isn't about the money. Roland ended the call. He felt a cold, sharp clarity. He was no longer just protecting his empire, he was orchestrating a public execution of a man's soul. He walked back into the main room and looked at Alara. She was standing by the window, the sunlight catching the dark velvet of the dress she would wear. She looked at him, and for the first time, the fear in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, burning hunger for the truth. "It's time for the second leak, isn't it?" she asked. "Yes," Roland said. The money was the bait. Now, we show them the blood. The 8 p.m. news cycle in Oakhaven usually belonged to weather reports and human interest stories, but tonight, every television in every sports bar, living room, and transit hub flickered with the same unauthorized transmission. Roland stood in the center of the safe house, his arms crossed, watching the screen as Cale initiated the second phase of the demolition. "Leak 2 is away," Cale said, her voice trembling slightly. This wasn't just data, this was human suffering. The screen didn't show bank statements this time. It showed a montage of high-resolution photographs taken from Thorne's own collateral folder. The images were blurred to protect the victims' identities, but the brutality was unmistakable. The same fingerprint-shaped bruises Roland had seen on Alara, documented like trophies on different women over a 5-year period. Accompanying the photos were time-stamped audio clips of Thorne's voice, arrogant, cruel, and chillingly entitled, detailing exactly how he used his office to silence them. The city went silent. In the bars, men put down their glasses. In the suburbs, families stared at the screen in a state of collective shock. The golden boy wasn't just a thief, he was a monster. "The server is melting," Cale reported, her eyes wide as the traffic spiked into the millions. The Justice Department's website just crashed from the volume of search queries. Every news outlet in the country is picking this up. It's no longer a local scandal, Roland. It's a national emergency. In his office at the courthouse, Julian Thorne watched his world dissolve into white noise. The light from the television cast a sickly blue hue over his face, which had turned the color of wet ash. He looked at the phone on his desk. It was dead. His political allies had disconnected their lines. His security detail was standing outside the door, but they weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him like he was a contagion. He realized then that Roland Crowe hadn't just attacked him, he had excommunicated him from the human race. "You think you've won?" Thorne whispered to the screen, his eyes bloodshot and crazed. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a heavy, black handgun. He didn't check the safety, he just tucked it into his waistband. "You want a show, Roland? I'll give you a finale the city will never forget." Back at the safe house, Roland turned away from the monitors. He walked over to Alara, who was staring at the images of the other women. She wasn't crying. She looked like she had been forged in fire. "They're free now," she said, her voice stronger than Roland had ever heard it. "He can't use those photos to hurt them anymore. The secret is dead." "The secret is dead," Roland agreed, "but the man is still breathing. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous animal in the woods." He looked at Silas, who was already prepping the armored transport. The gala was only hours away. The city was a powder keg, and they were about to walk into the center of the blast with the match still burning. "Get the car ready," Roland ordered. "We're going to the gala. It's time to finish this in the light. The public image of the golden boy has officially burned." The air in the safe house was electric, charged with the ozone of high-end electronics and the heavy, metallic scent of gun oil. Julian Thorne was no longer a politician, he was a frantic, cornered beast, and the city of Oakhaven was closing in. Roland Crowe stood in the center of the kitchen, watching the final digital breadcrumbs of Thorne's life vanish. The golden boy had been stripped of his shine, leaving behind only the rusted, jagged edges of a desperate man. "He's officially been abandoned," Silas said, entering from the perimeter check. "The governor just issued a statement. They're appointing a special prosecutor to look into the collateral files. Even the police union, the guys who've been in Thorne's pocket for a decade, have gone radio silent. He's a pariah." "A pariah with a badge and a gun," Roland reminded him. He looked at Cale. Where is he? Kale's fingers danced across the keys. She was tracking the GPS signature of Thorne's government-issued vehicle, which he had surprisingly not abandoned. He's moving. He left the courthouse 10 minutes ago. He's heading toward the west side. Wait, he just pulled into a private hangar at the municipal airport. Roland, he's not just running. He's meeting someone. The architect, Roland said, his jaw tightening. He's going to collect his payout and disappear before the feds can freeze his offshore access. If he gets on a private flight to Panama, he's out of our reach. He'll live like a king on the blood money he made at the docks. In the back room, Alara emerged. She was no longer the trembling girl from the breakfast table. The midnight blue velvet gown clung to her like armor, and her hair was swept back, revealing the sharp, determined lines of her face. She looked at Roland, her eyes reflecting the cold resolve of a woman who had seen the end of her own victimhood. He's going to the airport, she said. It wasn't a question. He thinks he can leave us behind. He thinks he can leave his shadow, Roland replied. He's mistaken. Roland turned to Silas. Change of plans. We don't wait for the gala to engage. If we let him reach that hangar, we lose the leverage. I want the strike team ready in 5 minutes. We intercept him at the airport. But Silas, I want him alive. A bullet is too mercy for what he's done to these women. I want him to stand in that ballroom tonight and see the world he thought he owned looking at him with disgust. And the cargo? Silas asked. Kale tracked the transport truck to a warehouse near the airport. If we go for Thorne, we might lose the truck. Roland looked at Alara. He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes for the women still trapped in that steel container. He realized then that his systematic destruction was no longer just about protecting his empire or satisfying his own code of honor. It was about her. We split the teams, Roland ordered. Silas, take the heavy hitters and hit the warehouse. Secure the victims. Get them to a hospital under our protection. Kale, you stay on the comms. I'm going to the airport. Alone? Silas barked. That's suicide. Thorne is unhinged. I won't be alone, Roland said, looking at Alara. I'll have the witness. Thorne's greatest fear isn't a gun, Silas. It's the truth he can't silence. As they moved toward the armored SUV, the city of Oakhaven seemed to hold its breath. The cornered rat was reaching for a way out, but Roland Crow was already closing the exits. The final hunt had moved from the digital shadows to the cold, hard asphalt of the municipal airport, where the untouchable would finally learn that there is no flight path long enough to escape the consequences of a broken code. The tires of the armored SUV hummed against the rain-slicked asphalt as they tore toward the municipal airport. Inside the darkened cabin, the silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic click of Roland checking the magazine of his sidearm, a sound as cold and final as a closing coffin. Beside him, Alara sat rigid, her hands folded over the velvet of her gown. She looked like a queen going to a beheading, her own or Thorne's, she didn't yet know. He's at Hangar 4, Kale's voice crackled through the comms. A Gulfstream is idling on the tarmac. Engines are hot. You have 6 minutes before they taxi. Roland didn't respond. He watched the blurred lights of the city streak past. He was thinking about the image of Alara's arm, the purple fingerprints that had sparked this conflagration. He was a man who had built a life on the trade of power, but Thorne had traded in something Roland considered sacred, the absolute sovereignty of one's own skin. As they swerved through the airport's perimeter gate, the guard already bribed into looking the other way, the hangar came into view. It was a massive, corrugated steel cavern flooded with harsh white halogen light. Julian Thorne stood near the boarding stairs of the jet, his charcoal suit rumpled, a leather briefcase gripped in his hand like a life preserver. Standing with him was a man in a beige trench coat, the architect. Roland slammed the SUV into a drift, tires screaming as they came to a halt 50 feet from the plane. He stepped out into the biting wind, his long coat snapping behind him. Alara followed, stepping into the light. Thorne spun around, his face a grotesque mask of sweat and fury. He saw Roland, and then his eyes drifted to Alara. For a second, the arrogant district attorney vanished, replaced by a man who saw his own death staring back at him in blue velvet. "You're late, Roland." Thorn screamed over the whine of the jet engines. He reached into his waistband and pulled the handgun, leveling it at Alara's chest. "You think you've won? You've destroyed my life, but I'll take the only thing you've ever tried to save." The architect moved to step onto the plane, but Roland didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on Thorn. He didn't raise his weapon. He simply walked forward, closing the distance with a terrifying, steady pace. "Shoot her, Julian, and you lose your only leverage," Roland said, his voice cutting through the engine roar like a blade. "Kill her, and Agent Miller, who is currently 6 minutes away with a tactical team, will have no reason to take you alive. You'll be just another dead corrupt official in a hangar full of secrets." Thorn's hand shook. The barrel of the gun wavered between Roland and Alara. "I am the law. I am the one who decides." "The law is at the charity gala, waiting for you," Roland countered, stopping 10 feet away. "The press is there. The mayor is there. And Silas just called me. The truck at the warehouse? The women are safe. Your cargo is currently giving statements to the FBI." The architect froze on the stairs. He looked at Thorn, then at the horizon where the first blue flashes of police sirens began to dance against the clouds. Realizing the game was over, the architect turned to run, but a single shot from Roland's suppressed pistol took out the man's kneecap. He collapsed onto the tarmac with a wet thud. Thorn shrieked, a high, thin sound of pure mental collapse. He turned the gun back toward Alara, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Julian, look at her," Roland commanded. Thorn looked. He saw Alara Vance standing tall, her chin tilted up, her eyes filled not with the fear he had spent months cultivating, but with a cold, devastating pity. "You're nothing," Alara said, her voice amplified by the hangar's acoustics. "Without the badge and the threats, you're just a small, broken man. I'm not afraid of you anymore. And neither is Oakhaven." The sound of the approaching sirens grew deafening. Thorn looked at the plane, then at the blood pooling around the architect, and finally at the woman he couldn't break. The weight of his own crimes seemed to finally crush his spine. He didn't shoot. He dropped the gun onto the asphalt and fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands as the first searchlights of the FBI choppers swept over the hangar. Roland stepped forward and kicked the handgun away. He didn't look at the police. He didn't look at the screaming architect. He looked at Alara and offered her his hand. "The rat is in the trap," Roland said quietly. "Now, let's go show the city the monster they elected. Thorn is in custody, but the true public execution happens at the gala." The Oakhaven Grand Ballroom was a cathedral of curated lies. Under the suffocating weight of 3-ton crystal chandeliers, the city's elite moved in a choreographed ballet of high-end silk and low-frequency gossip. The air was a cloying mixture of expensive lilies, vintage scotch, and the frantic, invisible sweat of powerful men who knew the ground was shaking beneath their feet. The golden boy was missing from his own victory lap. Julian Thorn's seat at the head table sat empty, a silent omen that the diners tried to ignore as they picked at their lobster thermidor. Then, the doors at the far end of the hall didn't just open, they surrendered. The mahogany panels swung back with a heavy, rhythmic thud that cut through the string quartet's Vivaldi like a gunshot. Roland Crowe stepped into the light. He was a pillar of shadow in a room of gold, his tuxedo tailored with such mathematical precision it looked less like clothing and more like a statement of intent. He occupied the doorway with the terrifying patience of a man who had already won. But it was the woman on his arm who stopped the room's heart. Alara Vance moved with a haunting, liquid grace. The midnight blue velvet of her gown seemed to drink the light, making her skin look like polished alabaster. Her hair was swept up, exposing the elegant line of her throat and the teardrop diamonds that sparkled with a cold, unforgiving fire. She wasn't the ghost who scrubbed their floors, she was the conscience they had tried to execute. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of 100 breath holds. "Crow," the mayor barked, stepping forward from the podium. His face was the color of spoiled ham, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of the lectern. This is a private event. You are a persona non grata in this house. Security. Roland didn't look at the guards who hesitated at the perimeter. He didn't even look at the mayor. He led Alara toward the center of the dance floor, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. The house is already empty, Arthur, Roland said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried to the back of the hall without effort. Julian Thorne isn't coming. He's currently being processed at a federal facility. He's traded his vineyard for a 6x9, and his silence for a chance to tell the FBI exactly whose names are written in his ledger. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Men looked at their wives, judges looked at the exits. You're lying, someone shouted from the back. Thorne is the law. Thorne was a predator who thought a badge was a license to hunt, Alara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the piercing clarity of a bell in the frost. She stepped away from Roland, standing alone in the center of the gilded circle. With a slow, deliberate motion, she reached for the lace of her long sleeve and pulled it back. The harsh halogens of the ballroom caught the fading yellow and purple map of Julian Thorne's violence. I am the evidence, she said, looking directly into the lenses of the news cameras that were supposed to be filming a gala. I am the one he broke because he thought I was invisible. I am the one who saw him meet with the architect. I am the one who heard him negotiate the price of the women he kept in the dark. On the giant monitors behind the podium, the charity slideshow flickered out. In its place, the screen split into three. One showed the thermal footage from Pier 12, the ghosts of victims huddled in the cold. The second showed the Panamanian bank transfers. The third was a live feed from the FBI's regional headquarters. There, on a screen 40 feet high, was Julian Thorne. He was slumped in a metal chair, his face a ruin of tears and snot. He was holding a pen, his hands shaking as he signed page after page of a confession. That's my signature, Thorne's voice crackled through the ballroom sound system, projected by Cale from the safe house. I gave the mayor $50,000 from the logistics fund. I gave Judge Holloway the keys to the beach house. Just don't let Crow near me. Please. The panic in the ballroom was instantaneous. It was a stampede in slow motion. The mayor tried to flee through the service entrance, only to be met by Agent Miller and a dozen men in windbreakers marked FBI. Roland watched the chaos with the detached curiosity of an entomologist watching a jar of wasps kill each other. He turned to Alara. In the middle of the screaming and the frantic phone calls, they were the only two people who seemed to be standing in the eye of the storm. He's gone, Alara, Roland said softly. No, she replied, looking at the screen where Thorne was being led away in handcuffs. He's finally exactly where he belongs. He's a public record. She looked at Roland, her eyes searching the cold gray of his. You did this. You risked everything. Why? Roland adjusted his cufflink, his expression returning to its mask of obsidian calm. I told you. I find it offensive when a man thinks he's better than the devil. But mostly. He paused, looking at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I wanted to see if the light in this city still worked. It turns out, it just needed a little help from the shadows. He offered her his arm one last time. They didn't stay for the arrests. They didn't stay for the questions. They walked out of the ballroom, leaving the elite of Oakhaven to burn in the fire they had helped build. As they reached the limestone steps of the Grand Hotel, the first snow of winter began to fall, white and silent, covering the filth of the street in a temporary, beautiful lie. Roland opened the door to the armored car, but before she stepped in, Alara stopped. She reached out and touched his hand, not out of fear, but as an equal. Thank you, Roland. Don't thank me yet, Alara, he said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. The world is still full of Julian Thornes. And I think you and I have a lot more work to do. The car pulled away into the night, leaving the golden ballroom behind. The King of Shadows and the woman who refused to be a ghost vanished into the fog, two predators of a different kind, ready for whatever the dark had planned next. The transition from the deafening chaos of the ballroom to the north gallery was like stepping into a vacuum. The long, narrow corridor was a tunnel of white marble and gold leaf, lined with the silent, judgmental busts of Oakhaven's founding fathers. The air here was colder, smelling of floor wax and old power. Roland and Alara were halfway to the private exit when the heavy double doors at the far end of the gallery slammed against the marble walls with the force of a thunderclap. Julian Thorne stood there. He was a nightmare in a tuxedo. His hair, usually shellacked into place, was a damp, frantic mess. His eyes were bloodshot, the pupils dilated until they looked like twin entry wounds. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was a man who had felt the first cold touch of the grave and had decided to drag everyone else into it with him. He was alone. He had clearly slipped his security detail in the confusion, a desperate rat finding one last hole to crawl through. "You think you've won?" Thorne shrieked, his voice cracking and echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He began to limp toward them, his movements jerky, uncoordinated. "You think you can just walk out of here after what you've done to me?" Roland stopped. He didn't reach for his weapon. He simply stepped in front of Alara, his body a wall of black silk and iron resolve. "The only person who did anything to you, Julian, was the man in the mirror. I just gave him a bigger audience." Thorne let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. He reached into the waistband of his trousers and pulled out the heavy black semi-automatic. His hand was shaking so violently that the barrel traced erratic circles in the air. "I built this city." Thorne screamed. "I cleaned the streets. So what if a few girls had to pay the price? What's a dozen lives compared to the order I brought to Oakhaven? I was the law. I was the god of this place." He leveled the gun at Roland's chest, but his eyes were fixed on Alara. "And you little parasite. I should have ended you the first day you looked at me with those judgmental eyes. I owned you. I own all of you." Alara stepped out from behind Roland. She didn't flinch. She looked at the gun, and then she looked at Thorne with a clinical, freezing disdain. "You never owned anything, Julian. You just held on to people until they realized you were too small to be feared." "Shut up!" Thorne roared. "I'll kill you both. I'll make it look like a murder-suicide. The police are still mine. I'll have the reports changed before the blood is dry. I'm the district attorney. My word is the only one that matters." "Is it?" Roland asked. His voice was terrifyingly soft, almost a whisper. Roland reached up and adjusted the lapel of his tuxedo. "Julian, you spent so much time worrying about the shadows I control that you forgot how technology works in the light. This gallery? It's the most photographed room in the hotel. And I took the liberty of updating the security system this afternoon." Roland gestured with a subtle nod toward the ceiling, where the small, red-lidded eyes of the security cameras were glowing. "The ballroom is still full, Julian," Roland continued. "And the screens? They aren't showing the FBI interrogation anymore. They're showing this. Your confession. Your weapon. Your madness. Every word you just said, about the girls, about the police, about the murder-suicide, is currently being live-streamed to every news network in the state." Thorne froze. His eyes darted to the camera lens above him, then back to Roland. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't, the legal exposure." "I don't care about exposure," Roland said, stepping closer to the barrel of the gun. "I care about the end. And this is yours." At that moment, the speaker system in the corridor crackled to life. From the main ballroom, a block away, the sound of 1,000 gasps and shouts of outrage could be heard leaking through the walls. Thorne's face crumpled. The realization that he had just committed public suicide, not with a bullet, but with his own tongue, stripped the final layer of sanity from his mind. He let out a primal scream and squeezed the trigger. Click. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. Roland didn't move. He didn't even blink. "I had Silas pull the firing pin while you were in the coat room, Julian. I told you, I keep the books." The doors behind Thorne burst open. Agent Miller and a swarm of tactical officers flooded the hallway. Thorn didn't even try to run. He dropped the useless gun and collapsed to his knees, his forehead hitting the cold marble. Miller stepped over the fallen gun and looked at Roland. You just gave us the cleanest conviction in the history of the state, Crow. But you're coming in for questioning, too. Of course, Agent, Roland said, smoothing his jacket. But I believe the lady has somewhere else to be. He looked at Alara. She was staring down at Thorn, a broken, sobbing man in a tuxedo, being hauled up by his elbows as the handcuffs ratcheted shut. The untouchable was finally in chains. Let's go, Alara, Roland said. The air is better outside. As they walked past the officers and out into the night, the giant screens in the ballroom were still glowing with the image of Thorn's arrest. The public execution was complete. The Golden Boy was dead, and the King of Shadows was just getting started. The aftermath of the gala didn't bring peace to Oakhaven, it brought a frantic, polarized energy. While the city's political foundations were being excavated by federal teams, the Crow Tower remained an island of terrifying calm. Roland stood in his private sanctum, the Crow's Nest, on the topmost floor. This wasn't the polished war room or the grand study, it was a glass-walled observatory that offered a 360-degree view of the city. Below him, Oakhaven looked like a circuit board, its veins of gold and white light pulsing with the frantic pace of a world being rebuilt. Silas entered, his footsteps heavy on the polished obsidian floor. He dropped a thick dossier onto the low table. The power vacuum is already being filled, boss. With Thorn and the mayor in federal custody, every mid-level shark in the tri-state area is eyeing the docks. They think because we went clean to take down Thorn, we've lost our teeth. Roland didn't turn around. He was watching a flickering neon sign 3 miles away. They mistake surgical precision for weakness, Silas. They think I burned the city's leadership to save myself. They don't realize I did it to clear the field. And Miller? Silas asked, leaning against a structural pillar. The FBI is still breathing down our necks. They're calling the live stream vigilante entrapment. They want to move on the syndicate before the public starts seeing you as a hero. Miller is a man of the law, Roland said, turning finally. His eyes were cold, but there was a flicker of something else, an anticipation. He knows that without the Crow Syndicate, this city would have collapsed into a gang war 10 years ago. He'll rattle his saber, but he won't strike. Not while I'm the only one who knows where the rest of Thorn's bodies are buried. The door to the nest slid open, and Alara walked in. She had shed the blue velvet gown for a sharp, charcoal gray suit. The diamonds were gone, replaced by a simple silver watch and a look of absolute, grounded authority. She didn't look like a guest anymore. She looked like an owner. The Sentinel Foundation is officially chartered, she said, stepping up to the glass beside Roland. I've already had 3 calls from the governor's office. They want to know if I'll testify in front of the Senate committee regarding the Port Authority's oversight failures. And will you? Roland asked. I'll tell them what they need to know to fix the system, Alara replied, looking out at the city. But I won't tell them everything. Some secrets belong to the people who survived them. She turned to Roland, her expression unreadable. You've given me the resources to build something real, Roland. But I know your gifts always come with a price. What's the bill for this one? Roland walked to a small console and tapped a key. A map of the city's North District appeared, the area most heavily affected by Thorn's logistics operations. The bill is simple, Alara, Roland said. The city is going to try to rebuild. They'll appoint new judges, new commissioners, new police chiefs. Most of them will be just as corrupt as the last, only more careful. I want your foundation to be the eyes I can't have in the light. You watch the front doors. I'll watch the back. You want a partnership, she said, her voice softening. I want a balance, Roland corrected. Thorn thought he could be the light and the dark. He failed because he was a hypocrite. I know exactly what I am. And I know what you are. Together, we ensure that Oakhaven never belongs to a single man again. Silas checked his phone, interrupting the moment. Boss, we have a problem. The architect didn't make it to the infirmary. Someone intercepted the transport 2 blocks from the hospital. He's gone. Roland's jaw tightened. The architect was the last link to the international syndicates that had funded Thorne's rise. If he was back on the board, the game wasn't over, it had just shifted to a global scale. He won't leave the city, Roland said, his voice dropping into that lethal, predatory register. He's a man of systems. He'll try to reclaim his assets. Roland looked at Alara, then at Silas. The transition was complete. The untouchable was in a cell, but the war for Oakhaven's soul had just moved into a higher gear. Silas, put the city on lockdown. I want every exit monitored. Kale, I want the architect's digital signature tracked across every satellite in the hemisphere. Roland stepped closer to the glass, his reflection merging with the lights of the city. Julian Thorne was just a symptom, Roland whispered. Now, we go after the disease. Alara stood beside him, her reflection ghosting against his. The maid and the Mafia boss, the victim and the vigilante. The crow's nest had never seen a pair like them, and Oakhaven was about to find out that the only thing more dangerous than a man with a crown is a man who knows how to break one. The architect is back in the shadows, and the hunt begins. In a city where everyone is for sale, who is truly untouchable? The truth has been leaked, but the war for Oakhaven's soul has only just begun. Uncover the next chapter. Would you like me to proceed with the part 2? If yes, drop a heart in the comments section and subscribe to our channel. Lots of love, Red Heart.